This is Austin Liti Limits, where authors talk to authors about books and the craft of storytelling. Sponsored by Blue Ink Review, because typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com. Mark Haber was born in Washington, D.C. and grew up in Florida. His first collection of stories was published in 2008, his first novel in 2019. That was nominated for a PEN Hemingway Award. He's the operation manager at Brazos Bookstore in Houston, and his new novel is St. Sebastian's Abyss.
Welcome to the show, Mark Haber.
Thank you for having me, Scott. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. So your novel, which I loved, St. Sebastian's Abyss, came out last year. And so it has a very unique style to it, I feel. There's a quality that to the prose that's very hypnotic. There's a cadence to it that is very specific, right? There's a lot of repeated phrases in the book. How did you home in on this particular style when you were coming up with this book?
That's a great question. I love books and fiction where the voice is as much a character or even a part of the story as plot or incident, things that happen. So I've always been attracted to obsessive characters and kind of myopic, single-minded, obsessive narratives. And a huge influence, as a lot of people know, would be the Austrian writer Thomas Bernhard. He was very repetitive, very circular. I think my books are a lot sillier than his. I think his books were very, very inward and very psychological. I think my books can be psychological, but I also try and have some fun. He never really let the reader know that these obsessive characters were also kind of comedic, and I of course pull the rug out from under my characters oftentimes because they are, I think, very funny, and I try and use that cadence, that repetitiveness for comic effect, to show the obsessiveness of the characters and their obsession, but also to show kind of the absurdity of their passion.
Right. Yeah, I was reminded when I was reading it of other styles of writing, like philosophy or art critique as well, of course, because of the characters. I remember reading Baudrillard in college, and when they have these kind of like these arguments that they're just kind of rehashing over and over and over. Was that style of writing kind of an inspiration for this as well, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I always bring up Thomas Bernhard in interviews because he's such a well-known figure of writing these kind of these rants, and he's so repetitive, and that's what he's known for. But there's so many other writers, whether it's fiction or philosophy, that kind of indulge or use that style. I think there were many other books in art criticism that came to mind as far as being an influence with the style and the repetition in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
So the narrator and his frenemy, Schmidt, I'll call him frenemy.
Sure.
Their obsession is pretty much borderline psychotic, and it does end up destroying the narrator's life, destroying 2 marriages, and then ultimately his friendship with Schmidt. Do you relate to that intensity of obsession?
I do. I think I'm a lot more self-aware, So I knew when I was 17 I wanted to be a writer, and I've been very passionate and enthusiastic about kind of following that path, that dream, but not to the exclusion of burning bridges, hurting friendships. So I can relate, but I think to a healthy degree. I see these people, and my natural instinct as a writer is to go to a certain extent that seems somewhat far, and then go beyond that, like a step or two, or 3 or 4 steps. And so I do relate to it, but I think in a much more healthy way. I don't think I am that kind of person. And these are characters who are they're not self-aware. And if they are aware, they don't care. They don't care if they're insulting people or hurting people or condescending, because they're so myopic.
Right.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, my wife and I took our kids to Europe for a couple
Uh-huh.
weeks, and we spent some time at the Louvre and at the Tate Modern in London. And I remember people kind of sitting there, because those places are packed, observing. People would observe the paintings in different ways, whether they were sitting on a bench or just kind of standing in front and talking. Is there an art space that you've spent time in to make you kind of think of how Schmidt and the narrator were standing in front of these paintings? Particularly, I found it amusing that they do the thing where they're blocking out the other paintings
Yeah, the monkey
of
paintings.
Beckenbauer. And I was thinking
Right.
what that would be like in a space like the Louvre, where there's crowds of people around,
Yeah,
and how
yeah,
they would try to do that. Is there an
yeah.
art space that you spend time in?
But that's a great question, and honestly, I'm guilty, but there isn't, and especially with Houston, that's got. I mean, in my neighborhood, there's the Rothko Chapel, there's the Menil, which is free. So I visit these museums, and we've got the Fine Arts Museum. It's a great art city, but a lot of it is really just my imagination. It's like I kind of invent these spaces in my head, so I can't say that that I've got a space that I relate to and I put it in the book. There really isn't. My wife got her undergrad and her graduate degree from art school from Savannah College of Art and Design. So I would kind of go through her old textbooks when I was writing this book, looking for terms and
Mhm.
expressions. And that was helpful. But as far as physically going to a space, or do I have a favorite space? I don't. I don't. It's more of my imagination, I think, than anything.
It's very interesting. So there's a
That's a
lot of
great question. I've
right.
never heard that question. I love it.
Yeah, I was just in Dallas this past week with my wife because we have a kid who works at the Dallas Contemporary, which is one of the museums up there, and there was an art
Yeah.
show there. Um, and it's interesting spending time in a museum. Um, because it could be either be kind of a ruckus place or it could be really quiet and kind of desolate.
Yeah.
And then the Louvre, in contrast, there's thousands of people in this place that is the mile, the halls are miles long. you know.
Sure.
And so I thought
Yeah.
it funny that, the motif in particular with their covering the other paintings and how you would do that in such a crowded space like the Louvre.
Right. Yeah. I think part of it is I know at some point I think it's referenced that they would give private tours, or they're so important, which is
Right.
also a joke because there are no art critics that are going to have thousands of adulating followers. That's
Right.
not the world we live in.
Right.
For good or bad. But so that was also kind of taking a stab at these ultra specific you know uh whatever genres of art and art criticism. But um no, I think as I said, it was definitely in my imagination, but I think they were so lauded as critics that they were able to say, hey, kick everyone out. We're here now. We want to look at the painting and block out the two big ones that we don't like. Um, but yeah, in a place like the Louvre, and I was able to visit, I was able to go to residency last year in Spain, and I was actually able to visit the museum in Barcelona that has my fictional painting.
Right.
Um, and it's in a fictional gallery. The museum is real, the gallery is not. And it was really interesting to go to a place I'd referenced, but I'd never been until after the book. So also has thousands of um, people that come by throughout the day. So a huge museum. So
That is interesting, and that brings to mind. So I had an interview with author S. Kirk Walsh, and she wrote
Mhm.
the book, The Elephant of Belfast. And
Yeah,
she had mentioned to me that she hadn't visited Ireland until after she wrote drafts of her book. And so then
yeah,
when she went there, she actually came back and made some changes because she was actually on the soil, breathing the air, looking at the buildings and stuff, and it made an impression on her. So visiting Barcelona, did it make an impression on you afterwards?
it did. It made an impression. One thing that was good, I thought, kind of reassuring, was that the way I envisioned it when I looked at it online and was doing research for the book, and I thought, oh, this will be the museum I'll use, is that I think I was fairly true to the museum. And then the other aspect is I'm not trying to write a book that has to be authentic. I wanted it to be authentic as far as the quality of writing and the story, of course, but you wouldn't want to read my book to get a history of a Flemish painter in the 1500s or Barcelona.
Right.
But no, it was really I don't it was really engaging to go to this place that I'd imagined in my life and in my imagination and seen online. to be there and go, oh, it didn't clash with what I imagined in the book, which was kind of reassuring.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some funny repeated motifs in Saint Sebastian's Abyss. One being the holy donkey.
Sure.
Another that I mentioned was the way that they observe the painting by blocking out other paintings by doing this.
Yeah.
There's Schmidt's mustache, which seems to flex when he gets irked or irritated.
Yeah.
Are there other writers that you find have very strong comedic skills and can do these type of motifs as well that have inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Saul Bellow is a great example of just being a really brilliant comical writer. And I've said this before, he's also a big influence as far as the mix of high and low culture, high and lowbrow types of society, but also of humor, you know?
Right.
So I wanted to have like the artist suffering from syphilis. To me, that's like low-hanging fruit. Like, oh, it's kind of a sexually transmitted disease, but then you mix it with something that's very highbrow, which is angels and the apocalypse and classical art. And I love that you know, that mix of high and lowbrow humor. Also, he wrote several books. He's an American writer. Donald Antrim is a really wonderful writer. He wrote a book called The 100 Brothers. He wrote several other books in last year or a year before he came out with a memoir. He's a really great American comical writer. Something else I was going to say about him, but it's this idea that that you're looking at things very seriously, but you're also kind of looking at the absurdity of it all.
Right.
Yeah.
I was recently revisiting Kurt Vonnegut. To me, he had
wonderful.
he had a great comedic eye, especially bringing in comedy into tragedy. I remember the scene in Slaughterhouse-Five where all the prisoners are being packed on the train, and there's a bum in the corner who has a fire going. He's going, this ain't so bad, you know, and the prisoners are all crying. He's like, this is fine.
Yeah, this is okay. Yeah, he was definitely, and I think like a lot of writers, it's a cliche. Vonnegut was definitely my entryway into going, this is what I want to do. Like, it's something about his books called to me and said, this is what I want to do. And yeah, so he's I've not read him in years, but he's, you know, just amazing.
Right.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of hit or miss. It's kind of interesting going back. You know, as a kid, I
Oh,
thought
I
everything
bet.
he did was great, but
Right.
after that documentary came out, I went and read the majority of his novels over 6
Sure.
months, and some of them are great and some of them are pretty terrible.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
I thought was interesting. So a lot of times when I approach a book, either they touch me emotionally or they touch me intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
And your book challenged me and touched me intellectually, because at first I didn't really like the character, the narrator and Schmidt.
Mm-hmm.
They were very hard for me to deal with, probably because they're just so obsessed with this thing that it's difficult to relate to something like that.
Yeah. They're pretty insufferable.
Right. Do you feel that people have to relate to a narrator to enjoy a novel?
No, I don't. That's not something it's funny. Everything comes down to me with language. So if I love the writing, if I love the language, I'm attracted to language. So I'm not looking to see someone I admire or someone I detest. And if that happens, that's fine. But I don't have to I don't have to get along or admire or even like the narrator or the characters to kind of fall into a book. That's not a concern of mine. I know it is with lots of readers,
Right.
and I get that. But it's not of mine as far as reading and for writing.
Right. I find though that it can be very easy if you find a book or a group of books you read and you emotionally connect with the narrator and the story.
Yeah.
That's very addictive. Right.
Yeah.
And then later on, when you come to a book that's more challenging, it makes you kind of question at first, like, do I like this book or am I just being challenged?
Sure.
And is that okay?
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, when I
Right.
read like a memoir or something, I mean, I'm hearing
Sure.
the voice of this person, and so there really is no wall between. I mean, there's editing and there's the things that you do. It's a craft, but there's not this big wall between the author and what you're reading. You're like, well, this is the person I'm listening to. So there are books I've read, memoirs by authors, or well, obviously by authors, that I walk away from the book really admiring and really caring for that voice and for that writer as a person. But there's just as many books where I either am indifferent, or I don't like the characters or the narrator, or I like him. So it's that whole spectrum. But it's not a deal breaker for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the cover of your book, because it's a beautiful cover.
Thank you.
In fact, the one and Reinhardt's cover is also beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Can you talk about this? I mean, I found
Yeah.
myself thinking about this painting while I was reading the book, even though it's not described in this particular way.
At all.
But
Yeah.
it's very striking, and it's hard not to think about it. How
Yeah.
important are book covers to you? And I know that you're a bookseller as well. Do you feel that they're important?
I think they're so important. We joke at the store how much we're obsessed by book design, and me personally, I'm obsessed with book design. I love good book design. I can't do it. I don't have that ability, but I've got that eye and that interest in what the designer did, and I think it is important because, well, if the publisher cares about what's in the book, then they're gonna hopefully care about what's outside. Also, if you're reading a book that's 100, 400, 500 pages, the only image you're given besides the one your mind produces, the images your mind produces while you're reading, is the book cover. So I'll be reading a 500-page book, and a lot of times it's a habit. I kind of pause and I look at the cover and I go back. So to answer your question, yeah, book design is really important for me, something I care about. And my good fortune is that Coffee House is very, very collaborative with their authors. They would never put out a book where the author didn't like it. That just doesn't happen. Where you've got authors on larger presses that make probably have huge book deals, and they may not see the cover until it's finished. And it's not even like, do you like it, as much as this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good day, take it or leave it. So it's very collaborative. They send out their authors a questionnaire, Coffee House does. What are colors you think about? What are covers? Not just colors, but what are adjectives you think about when you think about the book? And what are book covers you like that maybe remind you of what we're aiming for? So it's very collaborative. And Kyle Hunter designed both my books. The fonts are very similar, but it was very collaborative. I showed them images, and I said I think there should be kind of like splotches of paint. I said this with Reinhardt's Garden, but also with this one, and I guess you could say maybe it's black paint or ink for Saint Sebastian's Abyss. But no, I think cover design is really important, because to me, once you have a book, it's of a piece. It's part of what's inside.
Right. So what's
Yeah.
another book in the last year that has a cover that just first comes to mind that is
Oh,
amazing?
wow. I love, it's funny, for our bookstore in December, we did our top 10 list, and mine were my favorite book designs. So my 10 favorite. There was one called Carnality that came out by Other Press, and it's just the nun. And it's kind of a bright pink and white, and it's kind of a minimalist, and it's really, really good, and it's very striking. There's one by Caesar Ira, a storybook that New Directions came out with. I went like this. It's a big book, called The Famous Magician. That also has got a great cover. And I like covers that aren't literal. So even though this book has a Saint Sebastian on it from an old painting, at first when I saw the cover, I didn't like it. I really didn't. And then 24 hours later, I loved it. So you have to kind of digest it. My wife's like, just give it some time. But it is literal, but it's also not literal in that the painting in the book, there is no Saint Sebastian in it. That's just what the artist named it. So
Right.
I like book covers that leave something to the imagination of the reader and aren't quite literal. So.
Right. Yeah, a couple covers that I think of, the Book of Goose by Yoon Lee. It's a great, beautiful cover, but there's an awkwardness to it. Yeah. So
Yeah,
the goose's
I've heard
neck,
it.
my wife's like, what's wrong with the goose's neck? And it's
Yeah.
like, that's very telling. Fernando A. Flores' latest book has a great cover.
That was on my top 10 list. Yeah.
I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah, this is a great cover. I agree. Great cover. And Fernando's.
yeah, excellent. So what is something that you learned in this latest publication process, the whole process, that kind of surprised you, just some new thing you'd want to share with the writers community, that, something new that happened?
What's funny? I think it's been with this last book kind of reassured me, the the importance of booksellers, because Reinhardt's Garden I felt in my mind did well. I thought both books have done very well. I feel very, very lucky and very fortunate. But Saint Sebastian's Abyss was kind of on another level, and I think a lot of that was booksellers, kind of the people on the ground that do this, just like myself every day. I know people at Book People really got behind it. Javier at Book or Exile in Bookville in Chicago, and just all these people really got behind it, and that makes such a difference. So to have people kind of embrace something you did and urge other people to be enthusiastic about reading it is makes a huge difference, and that's kind of out of your control. That's something I keep learning with each book too, is that you can make the best book and be so proud of it and think it's the thing you wanted to do, but at a certain point, that's all. I mean, the fate of a book is not up to the author. It's up to the public. Readers can be finicky. It's up to the zeitgeist, what people are into. Part of me thinks this book did better because it had very short kind of snippet chapters, and Reinhardt's Garden is just one unbroken paragraph.
Right.
So it's the fate of the book I've kind of come to terms with, which I think is something that writers should know, is it's not, there's only so much you can control, and a book's success really is not up to the writer. It's not. The success of how good it is in your own mind is all in your hands, but after that, you just have to kind of leave it to fate.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. One book in the past couple of years that kind of just took off and nobody saw was like The Secret Lives of Church Ladies.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
A book out on a university press,
Yep.
Black author, short stories. I mean, it's like if you had asked a lot of industry people, is this book going to have a life of its own and do this way? They'd probably say no, just looking at history. But a book like that, took off. And what's interesting is when I talked to her, she didn't like the cover either when they first showed her that cover.
Isn't that funny?
Did
she come to like it at some point?
She came to like it because the cover took on a life of its own. She saw people dressing up as that woman on the cover for Halloween.
Oh, wow.
She said when she first saw it, it looked like she had been hit the way they did the makeup on her, and she didn't like that.
Yeah.
But she's grown to love it just because it's associated with her book.
Right. Yeah, I love it. I think it's a great cover. Our book buyer, I've not actually read the book, but it's done so well at our store, and it is such a good success story. It's so encouraging. But our book buyer, Keaton Patterson, got behind that book really early. He read it and just loved it. So when you see things like that, it definitely gives you hope. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. So what are you working on right now?
Coffee House accepted my next book, which will probably come out in like a year and a half, 2 years. And it's called Lesser Ruins. And it's a more personal book. It's still, I think, absurd and has a lot of the classic kind of repetition. But it's a more personal book. It's more serious. There is humor, a lot of humor. It might even be hopefully my funniest book. But at the same time, it also deals with other things that are a little more personal. And it deals with Judaism, with / anti-Semitism, and grief. The lead character, his wife has just died about a week before the book opens. But there's also a lot of digression, and I love it. I think it's my best book, and I'll get into the editing process probably in the next few months with Coffee House. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Now's the time in the show where we do the lightning round. It's not a concept that we came up with. We stole it from Inside the Actors Studio, but they stole it from Bernard Pivot, who stole it from Marcel Proust. A lot of people have used this concept.
Yes.
Mark Haber, are you ready for the lightning round?
I am. And I've looked it over, and I have to say, I really don't have answers for everything. So pressure is on.
That's the best way to be prepared. No preparation.
Absolutely.
All right. What's your favorite word?
Serendipity.
Excellent. What's your least favorite word?
Drunk. I don't know why. The sound of it, I guess.
All right. What turned you on?
Passion.
And what turned you off?
Narrow-mindedness.
What is your idea of happiness?
A few things, but very simple. A cup of coffee, a good book, literature, words, being around people you love. But coffee and books are key. So yeah, and my cat.
Excellent. Yeah, those are mine too. Who's
Yeah.
your favorite author?
It would be a battle between, oh gosh, probably Roberto Bolaño, Virginia Woolf, and probably Saul Bellow. I don't have a favorite. I wish I did.
I know it's a tough
Yeah,
question.
it's a tough one.
If you could be any character from any novel throughout history, who would that be?
Probably Sancho Panza, and just kind of sitting there, hanging out with Don Quixote, watching him be a numbskull.
Right.
That's probably my favorite book. So I don't want to be Don Quixote, though. I'd rather be Sancho.
Right.
Yeah, be the observer.
Right. That's right. Watch what
Yeah.
happens to that guy over there.
Yeah, exactly.
What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
Painting. Not a big surprise, but I have no talent, but I love it. One of the reasons I wrote this book, I love canvas and paint. I love the material of painting. I don't know what to do with it, but I'd love to be a painter.
Yeah, excellent. So what profession would you least want to do?
Emergency room doctor.
All right.
No
If heaven
desire.
exists, okay. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
Hey, Mark, you did your best. Come on in.
Excellent. All right, everybody, go out and get Mark's book, St. Sebastian's Abyss. Excellent. So funny. Thanks for being on our show.
Scott, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
This has been a presentation of Austin Liti Limits, made possible with help from our good friends at Blue Ink Review, where typing "the end" is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.